As the debut title from a small, unknown indie team, Final Fantasy X is an underappreciated classic and passed by an entire generation of gamers and critics virtually unnoticed. While having nearly 2 decades of discourse surrounding this title to lean on would be great, I have to be realistic here. Most people have never heard of it. Thus, I've decided to hoist upon my shoulders the burden of unpacking the narrative of this game and its supplementary material in order to reveal to you all just why this game is in a pretty weird spot. The debate over which Final Fantasy game is the best is an ancient one, so much so that it's widely believed to predate cave drawings. But for all the passion, and at times anger, poured into this ceaseless debate, I'll be straight with you. I don't have a favorite title in the series. I have a handful of games I prefer over a handful of others, sure. But when it comes to the question of which is the definitive, ideal Final Fantasy, I don't really have a pick. But you saw the name of the video, so let's not bury the lead. I might not know which entry in the series is my favorite, but what I do know is that I own too many copies of Final Fantasy X. 2 copies of the original on PlayStation 2, the PS3 remaster, the re-release of said remaster for the PlayStation 4, the Steam version, and just because I thought it'd be nice to play on the go, the Switch port for the remaster. If I had my way, the game would be the Skyrim of JRPGs, ported to any device capable of displaying an image. A smart fridge, an old TI-83, a battered LCD screen plugged into a potato. As far as I'm concerned, no device is too sacred for this game. For some reason, I repeatedly find myself content to just slip into the comfortable familiarity of Spira and re-experience that gut-wrenching, emotional journey about faith and sacrifice. I suppose I could just chalk this up to an obsession and leave it at that. Or I could do what I do best and overthink every attribute and subtlety that can be mined from this 20-year-old Japanese role-playing game and dissect each detail until I figure out why it has such a tight grip on my imagination and wallet. To be completely honest, I'm not sure how much can be said about this game that hasn't already been uttered in some venue or shape over the last 2 decades, but hey, that's why I made this channel. Self-indulgence. Realistically, Final Fantasy X is a game that needs no introduction. It's been talked about ad nauseum for plenty of reasons. Some have hailed it as one of the greatest games of all time. Others like to point to it as the start of Final Fantasy's downfall. In truth, it's much more complicated than that, and unpacking it would take literal hours, so that's not what I'm here to do. When I say the game's in a pretty weird spot, I'm referring to the fact that its world has some major plot threads that were pulled on by its creators years after the fact, and those threads have yet to be resolved. It was the first entry in the series to get a direct sequel, Final Fantasy X-2, and then after 10 years of hibernation, Square dropped 2 more pieces of content on us that continued the story and left things wide open, a poorly received audio drama and 1 highly contentious novel. These newer submissions into the FF10 mythos were created both to celebrate its 10th anniversary as well as gauge fan interest in a possible 3rd game. But it's now been an additional 10 years since then, and there's been nothing in the way of confirmation. For most projects, a decade of radio silence would spell certain doom, but with Square's track record, it's not too concerning. Will 10.3 happen? No idea. Though 10's continued popularity in Japan and the developer's interest does provide hope, or dread, depending on which side of the fence you're on. So, that's the weird spot. Aside from 7, it's the only mainline part of the series whose narrative ends on something of a cliffhanger, and unlike 7, whether or not it receives a resolution is pretty much a question mark. I'd like to say that it'd be tough to imagine a world where Square left a huge part of their legendary Pillar franchise unresolved, but here we are. And so, the purpose of this video is to examine some of the themes of Spira as they currently stand, and convince you, as well as myself, that the theoretical Final Fantasy X-3 presents us with an opportunity to tie off the story in a neater, maybe more thematically appropriate bow. The events of Final Fantasy X take place on the world of Spira, which, as far as we know, is home to a single continent and some islands here and there. If I had to describe the situation in which the denizens of Spira find themselves in, I'd have to go with pretty fucked. This is in no small part due to Sin, a colossal creature that's been roaming Spira over the last 1,000 years and laying waste to cities, towns, and villages, killing an unfathomable amount of people. Sin is named as such because Spirans believe, due to the religion of Yevon, that the creature exists as punishment for their ancestors' over-reliance on technology and machines, or machina. Thus, those who are left hold steadfast to the belief that, should they one day atone for their transgressions, then Sin will eventually vanish. But this isn't their only hope. Sin can be stopped, albeit temporarily, but only if a summoner can call in a being known as the Final Aeon and defeat Sin in battle. What's a summoner? Well, in the world of Final Fantasy X, when a human dies, their spiritual energy is released in the form of pyreflies. These pyreflies are then supposed to go to the far plane, a place linked to the inside of the planet where all this energy coalesces. However, not all these pyreflies are capable of traveling to the far plane on their own. Those who suffer a particularly violent death or otherwise have an unusually strong attachment to life instead remain bound to the realm of the living. Given enough time, these souls can either take the form of violent fiends, or if their will is strong enough, continue to walk among the living in a passable facsimile of their human form. I'm sure it's clear why then, in a world where mass murder at the hands of a giant whale monster is fairly commonplace, there might be an overabundance of fiends from time to time. Going back to the topic at hand, Summoner is the title bestowed on those able to guide the pyreflies of the deceased to the far plane so that they don't become fiends. They serve as guides for the dead and in turn provide comfort to those in grief, who can at least rest somewhat easier knowing that their loved ones won't become fodder for someone grinding for sphere levels. Summoners are also capable of communing with the Faith, stone effigies in which human souls are willingly bound. Through their link with the Faith, summoners can borrow their power and call upon Aeons, powerful physical manifestations of said faith. And so, the ultimate goal for most summoners is to travel up and down Spira on a pilgrimage, joined only by their closest comrades, and visit several temples throughout the land to receive a series of Aeons. This is all done as training to receive the final Aeon, which is found at the edge of the world in the ruins of the once great city of Zanarkand. Of course, a summoner's pilgrimage ain't easy. Aside from the fact that only a select few can become summoners, the process of communing with the Faith is physically and mentally taxing. Then factor in things like the trek itself, which has to be done on foot through harsh environments, the constant barrage of fiends, not to mention the knowledge that the ritual through which the final Aeon is called is one that takes the summoner's life. And should some saint manage to even put Sin down, there's only a few years of peace before the beast inevitably returns. All that in mind, it's small wonder that of the very few even capable of becoming summoners, even fewer have found it in themselves to see the journey through. These summoners walk through a land filled with the dead and the grieving, weighed down by the knowledge that the journey will end in their death in exchange for a few years of peace. To many, it's worth it. But to be faced with your own mortality, to see new places and people, to have all that time to think after setting out, it's more than understandable that many give up at some point. Some lack conviction. Others find their spirit broken by the trials along the way. Of course, keeping on brand, just as many meet their end before even reaching Zanarkand. If you're a summoner, how do you contend with your impending, completely avoidable death? If you're a guardian, how do you come to terms with escorting someone safely to their own demise? What do you say when parting with someone for the last time? There's this interview with Final Fantasy X's lead scenario writer, Kazushige Nojima, in which he reveals a bit more about the origins of what he considers the emotional core of the game's narrative. He talks about how, when the game was in the early stages of development, he had recently read a collection of stories about kamikaze pilots and their families. These included accounts from families who saw their children off, worrying about their health and wishing them well, despite both parties being fully aware that the pilots were never coming back. It's a remarkable anecdote, and it serves as a window into unfamiliar and raw human moments that, frankly, I don't think I would have ever given thought to otherwise. While sorting through some of my own thoughts on this and thinking through what I can only imagine those families must have felt, the same conflicting, swirling amalgam of emotions that I found there were immediately recognizable in Final Fantasy X. The fact that the parallels between these harrowing historical anecdotes and the narrative of this 20-year-old game are so apparent is a testimony to the strength of the game's writing. And it's always at its strongest in the quietest of moments. When a young girl you meet on the road gets excited upon hearing that you're on your way to defeat Sin, or when Yuna turns around for one last look at a place she'll never see again. These moments are sorrowful and resolute, confused and habitual. They're highly personal moments that tend to make me feel like I walked in on something that I wasn't supposed to see. And yet, Nojima gives us a front row seat to every last detail. Now, this wasn't the first time the series examined death through a thematic lens. X's immediate predecessor, Final Fantasy IX, has two of the more memorable examples found in the characters of Kuja and Vivi. Large portions of their character arcs sees each attempting to come to terms with the revelation that their life has an expiration date much closer than either expected. What makes them fascinating, of course, are the differences in how these two characters decide to square up to this inevitability. But as much as I adore Final Fantasy IX, I find that its successor's approach to the subject resonates with me much more. Death and all its baggage are just more tightly woven into the design of X's world. The spirits of the dead give power to the summoners, who guide the deceased to the afterlife, all the while winding their way to their own demise. Hell, half of Yevon's leadership are on scent, those who've died but clung to their mortal form. And they're set on perpetuating the lies they've sold Spira's populace because they view the false hope that they've proffered as the only means of keeping everything from spiraling into complete chaos. Now, it's probably time that I introduce some of the characters of Final Fantasy X and how they make their mark on the narrative and the world around them. And there's no getting around it. Final Fantasy X is the story of Yuna and Tidus. Tidus? It's Tidus. Tidus hails from Zanarkand. Not the Zanarkand as the people of Spira know it, ruined and desolate. He comes from a Zanarkand in its prime, a technological wonder much larger and more advanced than anyone in Spira could possibly imagine. When we first meet him, he's a sports star at the top of his game, but his world's quickly ripped away from him when Sin approaches the city and lays it to waste in a matter of minutes. After that, he's dropped into Spira, and we're led to believe that Sin somehow carried him 1,000 years into the future. Tidus serves as a stand-in for the audience. As unfamiliar with the customs of Spira as us, he's the perfect conduit through which the surrounding characters can explain the minutiae of this new world to the audience. And because Spira is so fascinating from its customs to its history and geography, listening to these explanations feels like a treat every time I play this game. Our other central protagonist, Yuna, is a native to Spira. Her father Braska was the previous summoner to put a halt to Sin over 10 years ago, and she aims to do the same. While your first impression of Yuna may be that of someone who's soft-spoken and non-confrontational, she actually possesses a fierce determination and conviction that draw many to her cause, and is capable of quelling even her detractors. It's pretty refreshing to see a character that strikes a balance between being on the quieter side, yet quite capable of being commanding in her own way. As a summoner who aims to rid the world of Sin, Yuna is all too aware of what awaits her at the end of the journey, but doesn't shy away from it. As a foil to Tidus and his status as a fish out of water, the strength of Yuna's faith in the teachings of Yevon is meant to give us direction and context, as well as perspective when Tidus causes her to question things that she once had taken for granted. Tidus, coming from a world much congruent to our own than the one he finds himself in, makes him a natural challenger for many of Yevon's teachings and rules. But quick as he is to question Yevon, he's also prone to taking certain concepts at face value, because he doesn't understand just how much death permeates through every facet of life in Spira. So when he's formally invited to join Yuna's pilgrimage as another guardian, aside from being thoroughly bummed out after learning his long-lost father Jecht somehow became Sin, he's also excited to take off on what he sees as a world-saving adventure, because he hasn't the faintest clue that summoning the final Aeon will kill Yuna, and none of the other Guardians have the heart to tell him. In the world they're from, it's just a given. Everyone knows how a summoner's role fits into Spira's cycle of life and death. Someone with genuine hope, untainted by just how deep that aforementioned cycle runs in Spira's veins. He envisions a journey with a triumphant ending. How do you take that from someone? Every moment that Tidus mentions life after defeating Sin is met with evasion or just enough silence to begin feeling uncomfortable. No one wants to reveal what truly lies in wait in Zanarkand to the only person who wouldn't know because, well, it must be refreshing to be around someone who's not tethered to the same anchor weighing everyone else down. As a result, it's not until well into the story when Tidus is finally told the truth. At any rate, as memorable as this story about a slow march towards certain death is, I don't think it would be nearly as memorable if not for the way it turns certain key elements on their heads. As I mentioned before, Spira is a world with a fascinating history and deeply engaging mysteries. Though much of its population and customs are stuck in the past, very little of its history is actually known to its citizens aside from the broadest of strokes. But in the end, the party discovers that much of what Yevon preaches is based on lies and, at best, half-truths. Sin, we come to find out, isn't the result of an over-reliance on technology. Zanarkand, which in the present serves as a reminder of the perils of hubris, we learn was once a city of summoners. What now stands as Yevon's holy city, Bavel, was far more advanced. For reasons unclear, the two cities warred, and Bavel's superior technology all but assured their victory. Knowing Zanarkand and its people were doomed, the summoner Yu Yevon devised a plan in which the city's remaining citizens would be transformed into Faith, who would then in turn use their collective power to summon an ageless, self-contained version of the city far out to sea. Yu Yevon then used the Faith to harness a massive amount of Pyreflies in order to create the first Sin. The purpose of this creature was to act as both sword and shield, protecting the Dream Zanarkand from discovery while decimating Bavel and any other large cities. Over time, this base instinct to destroy and protect became all that was left of Yu Yevon. Sin is not eternal because it's unbeatable, but because once defeated, Yu Yevon takes possession of the Summoner's final Aeon and uses it as a new host to slowly rebuild the armor of Sin around it until ready to re-emerge and continue its task. And so, Spira's saviors inevitably become the instruments that continue to terrorize it. Over the next 1,000 years, whatever remained of Bavel's leadership organized into the religion now known as Yevon, and spreads the tale of the misdeeds of Zanarkand and how it led to the appearance of Sin, intent on covering up the fact that their city was built on, and continues to be run by, the very same machines that their teachings disavow. The effect of this twist is expertly compounded by the truth behind the final Aeon. When Yuna and her guardians finally reach Zanarkand, it's revealed that the method of attaining the final Aeon is unique from how the other Aeons are acquired. The final Aeon is created by one of the Summoner's guardians willingly giving their life to become a new faith, the idea being that only a strong enough bond like that between lovers or comrades is capable of creating a power that can topple Sin. Since Jecht, Tidus' father, became Braska's final Aeon at the end of their pilgrimage, well, that's how he came to serve as Yu Yevon's new vessel. If you're new to all this, then what you might have picked up on by now is that Tidus wasn't thrown 1,000 years into the future like we're led to believe at the start of the game. In actuality, he was a resident of the Dream Zanarkand created by the Faith, merely picked up and brought across the ocean. While very much real, he's more akin to a summon, meaning that if the Faith were to disappear or stop dreaming, Tidus would vanish. But still, it's through his arrival to Spira, his challenging of Yevon's teachings and the experiences he shares with the rest of the Guardians that caused the group to ultimately spurn the final Aeon ritual, kill the ghosts in charge of said ritual, and vow to find a way to permanently defeat Sin in what is easily the game's most pivotal scene. This is what's so brilliant about the narrative of Final Fantasy X, that the weight of its story is strengthened by the way in which it reverses the roles of several key characters. Once they learn how they might get rid of the beast for good, Yuna, who journeyed to Zanarkand believing that success meant death, for the very first time begins to imagine a future for herself of a life after sin. But as her mind tries to wrap itself around this possibility for the very first time, Tidus privately comes to terms with knowing that putting an end to Yu Yevon means the dissolving of the faith and his disappearance as a result. Their roles are flipped so effortlessly with this final twist. These aren't out-of-the-blue plot twists for the sake of complicating things or for shock value. They're developments choreographed and built up from the very beginning that flip the script for some of our characters, putting them each in a position that they could have scarcely imagined at the journey's outset. When the party finally puts an end to sin, Tidus and Yuna are forced to say their goodbyes as he begins to fade away. It's a sad ending, but one that's perfectly on brand for the game's narrative. The point was never to get our main leads hitched, it was always about learning how to cope with loss and move forward regardless. To this day, Spira remains one of my most loved fictional worlds. Maybe a few Final Fantasy games before or since have had worlds or stories just as complex or even more so, but 10 has always stood out to me as one of the more cohesive and relatable titles due to its perfect marriage of themes, characters, and world building. For being a game all about death, it could have been a real bummer, but instead I can't help but smile throughout the game's final moments. The whole experience is smartly written so that it explores different relationships with and emotions surrounding the concept of death. Ultimately, the concept just becomes a jumping-off point for weaving a tale about hope, faith, how we remember people, and how we take the good from the bad. You know, classic stuff. But then it kept going. A lot of people enjoy clowning on Final Fantasy X too, and look, I get it. There's plenty to take issue with, from the cheese to the sheer tonal whiplash coming off the heels of its predecessor. The game had a lot to live up to after the critical acclaim the original received, and I won't waste my time or yours attempting to swat down criticisms. They're warranted. But I'm not here to dispense the hot takes. Instead, I'm going to talk about some of the game's merits, because it certainly has plenty. I will say this, though. The faults found in Final Fantasy X-2 mostly come down to execution and presentation. Unplanned sequels rarely go over well. Too often, they ignore development and growth from a previous installment or strip away any of the intrigue or mystery by answering questions that no one had. In my eyes, though, X-2 doesn't have this problem, because in its most bare-bones outline, the game's plot hits a home run. Consider this. Set 2 years after the original, X-2 tells the story of a world divided on how to best move forward after the defeat of Sin. Some factions continue to cling to Yevon's teachings or else try to adapt them into something new, and then there are others that rebel against any form of Yevon rule. With death by giant whale no longer a threat, people are now unafraid to travel Spira, and various groups have been forming all over the place with the purpose of learning everything they can about Spira's history. Meanwhile, Yuna's mostly been enjoying life back in Besaid, but when Riku brings Yuna a sphere recording showing a person who looks and sounds remarkably like Tidus, caged in an unknown location, she sets out once more. Joined by her cousin Riku and newcomer Not Lulu, Yuna hunts spheres in order to learn the truth behind Tidus' mysterious doppelganger. Eventually, the girls learn that the man in the sphere was not Tidus, but Shuyin, a man from the real Zanarkand of 1,000 years ago whom Tidus was likely based on. As the relationships between different factions vying for control over the course of Spira's future continue to fall apart, our trio discover that Bevelle has a few more secrets buried deep in the network of tunnels running below the city, the biggest being Vegnagun, a colossal, sin-sized superweapon that Bevelle had developed at some point before their war with Zanarkand. This setup does everything right. It reads like a natural continuation of its predecessor, offering fertile ground for exploring the clash of ideals for life post-Sin, while working to create new questions that deepen Spira's lore. The idea of an entire people, once under the rule of a religion and an unstoppable monster, all setting out to discover the truth of their past and tensions rising over how they choose to move on, is immediately an engaging premise. The Farplane suddenly becoming unstable and a secret superweapon under Bevelle suddenly going missing, also ripe with intrigue. Now, the way everything unfolds doesn't exactly live up to its outline, but Final Fantasy X-2 happened, and it happened the way it did. The canon ending is that Tidus returns, and while the fan in me enjoys seeing our boy get a second chance, the wannabe writer prefers when death and other consequences are a bit more permanent. As it stands, it's a fun game that expands in Spira's lore in intriguing ways, with an ending that undercuts the impact and meaning that the original had in spades. And for a while, the story of Final Fantasy X ended there, with Tidus and Yuna reuniting. Had it remained that way, I probably would have looked at the 10 duology as one half masterpiece, another half fun victory lap through Spira, with, if nothing else, some really cool ideas. But then 2014 happened, and the world of Spira was torn open again with a question mark scratched in after its happy ending. And though things got off to a rough start, I find myself unable to see this as anything but an opportunity to wrap things up with a more thematically cohesive bow. A large part of me does dread whatever developments 10.3 would bring to its world, but I'm not kidding myself. I'm a Spira shill, and my curiosity and love for the fictional world far outweighs any apprehension I might have. As part of the Final Fantasy X 10th Anniversary project, the HD remaster came with a new audio drama that provided a glimpse into the events following 10.2. But even more infamous is the short novel released around the same time, Final Fantasy X 2.5 Price of Eternity. Price of Eternity lacks an official English translation, meaning that when it was released, plot details were drip-fed to the fanbase through rough translations that lacked context, an experience I remember all too well. Part of me wonders if maybe this drip feed of plot details without context caused it to become a bigger source of derision than it otherwise might have been. But I have to be real. How do you sugarcoat a bomb disguised as a blitzball killing a recently resurrected Tidus? I've read some fan translations of this novel over the years, and there's certainly a handful of things I found within that I'm not a huge fan of, but I also don't think that I could, in good faith, form a concrete opinion about it based off of these translations alone. When it comes down to it, I view it a bit like I view 10.2, an entry that I appreciate more for its ideas than its execution. Anyways, here's the shortest summary I can muster for Price of Eternity. Beginning just before the canon epilogue to 10.2, this novel shows us that just because Tidus has returned, all isn't well. Upon learning that 2 full years have lapsed since his disappearance, he immediately begins to feel like a fish out of water, and not like he did before. He has pre-established relationships now, and the revelation that life for others has moved on without him begins sowing the seeds of insecurity. Additionally, Tidus now knows the truth of his origin, and as thrilled as he is to be back, he knows that he shouldn't exist. As a result, he spends time wondering if he's quote-unquote real. Is he a manifestation of fireflies, reacting to what those around him want to see and hear? If he is, does that mean he's no longer his own person? Both great questions. Whereas Yuna's concerned, even though she's just reunited with Tidus, she's begun reckoning with the fact that she hasn't fully explained the truth behind Sin's creation and the depths to which Yevon's lies ran. There are plenty of reasons for this, including that it all brings up emotions and memories that she's not ready to confront, but in the main, she seems primarily worried that those still faithful to Yevon wouldn't fully understand, or that they might even blame her for the religion falling apart. She does begin telling people her story, but ultimately, she decides it's her responsibility to take up the mantle of leadership among those not ready to move on from Yevon, because she's not ready to move on either. The crux of this novel deals with Yuna and Tidus getting lost at sea, winding up in a Besaid of 1,000 years ago during the war between Zanarkand and Bevelle. Most infamously, Tidus gets killed by a bomb disguised as a blitzball, and Yuna ends up resurrecting him, with Tidus none the wiser. I'm gonna omit a ton here, but essentially the pair learn about the old deities worshipped before the creation of Sin, and discover that the island they're on is actually a manifestation much like the Dream Zanarkand, created by an unsent summoner. Yuna and Tidus return to the real Besaid and witness a pair of previously unsent people from the pre-Sin era fading away. The audio drama Final Fantasy X Will takes place a few months after Price of Eternity and introduces a few new characters, but we don't talk about them. The big takeaways here are Tidus appears weaker than before, his relationship with Yuna is strained to the point of breaking as she continues her duties as High Summoner, and, most groan-worthy, Sin somehow returns. Alright, so where do we go from here? It's hard to say, it's been almost 10 years since these new pieces of content came out. With Final Fantasy being one of the biggest franchises in gaming, and certainly within the JRPG sphere, it's fairly odd that official supplemental material would work to expand and continue the narrative in seemingly major ways before just being kind of abandoned. If the FF7 remake wasn't happening, I'd probably be saying the same thing about the secret ending at Dirge of Cerberus, but I digress. Leaving us with Yuna vowing to defeat a returned Sin is a decidedly bad way to conclude the FF10 mythos, essentially back where it started. I'm sure by diving real deep, someone could assert that this new cliffhanger works to reinforce that Spira will never escape from its never-ending cycle of death and destruction, but even I'm not that crazy, probably. Will Square give up on pushing the story further and just let fans come up with their own theories from now until the end of time? Or will we receive closure through another game, book, or, God forbid, stage play? So far in this video, I've focused on breaking down everything that's happened so far as simply as possible, more intent on highlighting what the sub-series has to say rather than examining its plot beat by beat. But now, I'm going to walk through some of my thoughts on where the broader strokes of the narrative could try and go. My goal here isn't to show you my latest fanfiction. Neither is this an attempt to build a single cohesive outline for Final Fantasy X-3 or Sin Returns or whatever you want to call it. It's just a bit of thought exploration. Multiple ideas in here will probably clash, and that's cool. There's no one way that the story has to end. Any route Square may take could feel correct so long as it's well executed. Where the narrative currently leaves us, the world of Spira has been caught in the grip of a phenomenon called beckoning. In short, when someone thinks of another person who's dead, that person will be summoned to their side. Historically, this was something that could only be done when visiting the far plane, but suddenly the far plane is unstable, and now this is happening all over the world. What's more, the beckon can speak and interact with others like an unsent. Apparently those who are beckoned disappear when they learn of their true nature, which seems kinda anticlimactic, but I'm interested to see how it's dealt with. I should also mention that Tidus is also a beckoning now after his second death during Price of Eternity, so that's a thing. What this all suggests to me is that something is fundamentally broken in whatever process governs the cycle of souls, or whatever you want to call it, in the far plane. Do we even know if the Pyreflies are a truly natural occurrence in the first place? Or maybe the fact that Pyreflies can be kept from going to the far plane, kept as faith, etc., is already against the natural order of things. What I mean is, the far plane runs deep into the planet, but maybe the portion that people can visit, that above ground piece in Guadosalam, is something that Spirans weren't supposed to have access to in the first place. As it stands, beckoning on this scale clearly shouldn't be happening, but my bigger question here is, what sort of consequences does this have? Well, the most obvious issue is that Sin's returned, and we don't want him running around. But he can't be the main threat because that's not interesting at all. If the arc of Spira thus far has been, first break free of the unending threat of Sin, and next have its people begin to define themselves beyond the cycle, then I guess it could make sense that the following step could be for them to figure out how to unshackle themselves from the past. Because yeah, many have chosen how to move forward, but Spira was trapped in that cycle for 1,000 years. Those wounds are fresh. Deciding what principle should guide you is one thing, but when the dead start coming back from the beyond and you're met with the prospect of parting again, could you really do it? It's not hard to imagine Spirans being split on whether the dead should stay or should go, creating a lot of potential for conflict. Because there's no doubt that whatever's going on with the far plane is something that needs to be fixed. I think that's what's so appealing about some of these ideas and the implications that they might hold for the future of the 10 sub-series. In the original, Yu Yevon may have been a singular entity behind much of the chaos, but the core conflict wasn't about stopping this one person who wanted to take over the world. It was much more about confronting something that was more akin to a force of nature, an inevitable part of life, and the conflicts that occurred between people when rifts in ideology form. It was less uncovering a scheme of an evildoer and more chronicling the growth and decisions of cast of characters as they deal with a wider problem. 10.3 could very much feature a return to the style of conflict, and I'm all for it. While our cast sets out on a journey to fix what's broken, the conflict could come from the way that their separate internal struggles weave together in a manner that challenges the group's purpose. Sure, Yuna knows that fixing the far plane is the right thing to do, but does she even want to? I'm sure that there are plenty of other issues that could arise from this. As Riku is against visiting the far plane in the first place, she might find her well of sympathy for others a little tapped. It's not hard to imagine her taking a more hardline stance against allowing the beckoning to continue. I could even see a small faction of Ronso wanting to keep families and friends who've been beckoned from departing, given Seymour killed most of them towards the end of the original game. When I consider everything going on at the far plane, my mind inevitably focuses in on the Bevelle Underground, that network of tunnels running deep under the city that seem to lead deep into the far plane itself. Surely these were man-made. Perhaps this could be part of what sparked the war between Bevelle and Zanarkand in the first place, the former attempting to harness the Pyreflies as a source of energy for their machina. Of course, that sounds like a bit of a retread of the whole Shinra plot from FF7, so if that line of thinking is at all accurate, it'd have to play out a bit differently, or at least it couldn't be the focus. In any case, all this beckoning nonsense could go a long way in making exploration in 10.3 a lot more interesting. The landscape of Spira itself could change if entire villages or settlements are being brought back on top of currently existing populations or in places long since abandoned. So far, most notable developments in the world of Final Fantasy X have illustrated to us that true happy endings are hard to come by. The idea seems to be that, for the hands of time to start moving again in this world, certain sacrifices must be made. In the first game, said big sacrifice was Tidus, and while having him vanish would be a repeat of the first game's ending, I'd assert that it could be made more interesting by exploring the twice resurrected Tidus from another angle. The Tidus that we know has always been the center of attention. Star Blitzball player, one of Yuna's legendary guardians, his father was Sin. Despite this, there could be a lot to gain from building off his development from the novel and audio drama. One thought is that a large part of Tidus' character arc could explore him coming to grips with the fact that this is no longer his story. He's a phantom from the past, and life in Spira has and will continue to move on without him. Watching Tidus slowly come to peace with himself as he begins to understand his role as merely a secondary or even tertiary character in this story could be especially powerful if used to underscore, say, a narrative that sees Yuna finally coming into her own. Speaking of our High Summoner, I've read a lot of conflicting opinions over the years about the direction her character seems to be moving in after 10-2. And while many assert that her returning to Yevon in some form is a massive backstep for her growth, I do have a different view on the subject. The personal struggles that each of us contend with throughout our lives is rarely a straight line. If anything, the line's a bit more of a Jeremy Bear Me. It loops around, makes random turns, and crosses over itself a handful of times. That's to say, we all have our good and bad days. The answers we have for ourselves on Monday might not work on a Wednesday. Internal issues that we thought had been resolved can resurface years later in an entirely different context as our lives and situations take on new forms. Yuna possesses a nearly limitless sense of responsibility to the world around her. Even in her time as a Sphere Hunter, she found herself unable to stay neutral as tensions between factions rose while the threat of Vegnagun grew ever larger. But now she's settled into a more normal life on Besaid, and those in the community look to her for guidance. Her deciding to fall back onto Yevon's teachings, even as a framework, is completely natural given that religion ruled over Spearan life for over 1,000 years. It's the only way of life her and everyone else knew. Whereas the original game saw Yuna steal her resolve and make a decision for herself, a future title could explore the reasons why she has that sense of responsibility to begin with. Maybe even have her contend with the possibility that the values she held onto while growing up are no longer working in a changed world. Because as much as she grew in 10-2, Yuna's someone who's been anchored to the past in numerous respects. While spending way too long mulling over this segment of the video and deciding whether or not I wanted to scrap the whole thing or not, I came across a video with a nugget of information that immediately fascinated me. The video is part of a series by YouTuber DansG08, I probably butchered that name, but I highly recommend watching them. The videos highlight information found throughout the Final Fantasy X Ultimania, a solid portion of which I'd never heard or even read about before. The nugget in question is a blurb from the Zanarkand Dome portion of the game, describing content from an early script that could have laid the groundwork for a compelling don't meet your hero situation. In it, Braska leaves a sphere for Yuna, explaining that even after learning the truth behind the final Aeon and Sin, he still intends on summoning Jecht. Fully aware that doing so will only perpetuate the cycle, he apologizes and asks his daughter to do what he couldn't and kill Yu Yevon. At the end of his long journey, he accepts that he's just another pawn in Yevon's deceit. The concept of a world-renowned hero racked with guilt over not believing in the very thing they're worshipped for is simply really cool. And the revelation about her father's mindset would shake Yuna to her core. She became a summoner to follow in her father's footsteps, and while she wound up finding her own path, she still looks up to him. But having to reckon with the difference between the man that she knew and the man who reached Zanarkand, broken by Yevon, no longer having faith that his sacrifice will mean anything, well, it'd be an excellent jumping off point for Yuna beginning to define herself for herself. Now, obviously this didn't make the final cut. In the final version of the game, Braska doesn't have much to say about the last Aeon except for that there's a chance Sin won't come back. But I don't think it'd be too much of a stretch to retroactively work something like this in and say that he wasn't being entirely truthful to his guardians. When it comes down to it, I'm not so much interested in what the plot of Final Fantasy X-3 could be, as much as I am the engaging ways that the characters could be developed in a radically changed world. The Beckoning, a haywire Farplane, the old deities of Spira mentioned in the novel, they're mostly great concepts, but ultimately they're only tools to explore the denizens of Spira. If Sin coming back is all 10-3 has to offer, then it's a massively missed opportunity to challenge the narrative and characters that people have loved for the last 2 decades. But until I play it, I'll reserve judgment. Say what you will about the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Square's proven to me at least that they can do justice to old properties and flesh them out with nuanced, character-driven stories. So, here's hoping they can share some of that same energy with their future projects. Thanks for watching. With an extensive catalog of 2 whole videos, this channel serves as my outlet for exploring some of my passions while keeping them separate from my other hobbies and career. Hopefully as time goes on, I can make uploading more of a regular thing. This space isn't just reserved for droning on about JRPGs either, though, as my favorite genre of games, I'll probably never stray too far from them. If you've enjoyed my content so far, you can plan on hearing my thoughts on movies, shows, other types of games, or really any other subject that I can't get out of my head. I've got drafts for like 9 other scripts right now, and I don't want to commit to saying which is next at the moment, but until next time, stay awesome.